And Scott, let's just start with what CBD is. It's not the stuff that makes you high in pot, but it is supposedly something that has some medicinal qualities.
Well, it does have medicinal qualities. There's an approved drug, Epidiolex, that's a natural derivative of CBD derived from cannabis, but don't think it can't make you high. So the CBD that's derived from cannabis, some of it does have THC in it. When we look at it and analyze it, there are high concentrations of THC in it. And part of the problem is it's hard to differentiate from CBD that's derived from hemp, which wouldn't have THC, from CBD derived from marijuana and cannabis, which potentially could have THC in it.
All right, well, that's a little scary. How do you regulate that? What's legal? What should be?
Well, that's the problem. Now there's so much CBD flooding the market because Congress legalized the growing of hemp, and you have more hemp growers now wanting to put CBD oil into the market because it's perceived as a high-margin derivative of hemp. You're going to have more CBD in the market. It's going to be hard for regulators to differentiate from the CBD that's derived from cannabis versus hemp. And what is derived from cannabis could have high levels of THC in it. The dogs have a hard time differentiating as well.
What? What do you mean dogs?
The sniff.
Oh, the dogs who sniff it.
Yeah,
okay, I thought you meant eating it.
Well, the dogs are getting it too. I mean, people.
No, I thought you meant people that are giving it to them.
Yeah, I thought
well,
so
people
too.
are giving it to the dogs on a perception that if you give your dog CBD and you go away for work, somehow the dog's going to be more relaxed by the time you come home. I mean, this is utterly absurd. There's no science to support this, and it's flooding the market. Most of these products are illegal right now. I think the challenge is that the big packaged food companies want to get in this business, and right now there's no legal path, so they're reluctant to step forward. They're the ones putting pressure on the regulators.
I'm sorry, Adina, we're arguing about the CBD and the potential that we might get THC in some of the CBD, but we're legalizing pot everywhere. I mean, that's the real issue, isn't it? I mean,
well, it's on a state basis, and I think there's going to have to be a federal reckoning at some point between what the state's doing and the federal government's regime. But, you know, if you legalize CBD and you can't adequately regulate THC components in CBD, you can now have interstate commerce effectively and trade
so
in
it's
THC.
The specifics, but I mean, the larger issue is whether we know whether we really want to just go headlong into just legalizing.
Well, remember, there's safety issues here. There's cumulative effects from taking too much THC. We know, for example, there's liver toxicity associated.
But here we go. But I mean, we know that we talk. Yeah.
If you put it in every food substance and you have it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you're getting a lot of CBD. So.
Sorry, Didi.
No, I was just wondering, how do you regulate not necessarily how in and of itself it affects you, but how it might interact with other things you might take throughout the day, which in and of itself might be fine?
Well, those are the questions I think the agency needs to answer. That's why they had this workshop. I set this workshop in motion. The question is what FDA is going to have a reckoning here. Congress had an expectation, I think, when they passed the Farm Bill, even though they preserved the FDA authorities, that there would be a pathway to get CBD into the food supply. So the question is, how do they do that? Congress could legislate a one-off around CBD. It might be faster for the FDA to require notifications from the companies and put the onus on the companies to come in with the scientific data to demonstrate that questions like the one you asked, that it can be safely put in food, that there isn't a cumulative effect, what is the concentration? Presumably, the agency would set a low concentration on what's allowable in food, and the higher concentration would be a pharmaceutical-grade CBD component. There's ways to do that. The GRAS notification process, the food additive petition process, it would take years to do it for the companies because I don't think they have the scientific data.
That's interesting. If the onus is put on the companies and they're told they have to come up with it, what would that do to this industry overall? Put things on a freeze for years?
Well, I think the industry would probably welcome that process right now because I think at least the legitimate companies, the big packaged food companies, just want a pathway that they can follow. I think they're probably willing to go out and invest in the science, recognizing that that's going to be a barrier to entry to other people who want to come in. That might be the most expeditious way to do this. The idea of this workshop was to come up with a set of recommendations on what the regulatory framework would look like. I mean, one of the things is to punt it back to Congress and say Congress has to legislate specifically on CBD. That could take years.
You know, Scott, you're in a really interesting position. You're a medical doctor who still practices. You've worked on Wall Street, or back on Wall Street now, but you've also been FDA commissioner. So when you see things like these pot stocks taking off, what do you think?
Well, I think it's getting ahead of where the regulation is right now. Ultimately, I think that there's now such an impetus behind this. There's going to be a pathway, at least for the CBD. I think the issues around THC and some kind of federal framework around that, that's a long way off. That's going to take 1 or 2 more administrations. But at least with CBD, I think that there is going to be a pathway. But it's going to take a couple of years. And I do believe that the companies are going to have a hard time coming up with the scientific data, not just to demonstrate the safety of these products, but frankly to demonstrate the benefits. All these uses that they're purporting right now, the fact that it's being put in dog food and pet food, I don't think they're going to come up with any evidence to support that. Now, if it's a food additive, they could potentially put it in a food as long as they're careful with the claims that they're making, not to say it has a therapeutic effect, and they could have a legal path to do that. Right now, the claims that they're making, probably violate the law.
All right, so put on your doctor's hat, and what would you tell consumers at home who are thinking about trying some of these products?
They're not getting a benefit. They spent $2 billion a year on this last year. Cowen did a survey that said 7% of all Americans have reported trying some CBD product. They're doing this without getting a therapeutic benefit.